This is Legacy Battle. Make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube, iHeart, Amazon Music, Spotify, whatever else I'm forgetting. We're on so many platforms now. I'm Michael Adams, creator of Legacy Battle. My panelists tonight from the Gridiron Battle Zone, Brian King. From Steelers Nation South, Rollo Cawthon. And Ball State Athletics, Paul Avocott. Our special guest tonight, we're joined by a former college coach, but NFL coach as well. He's been with several teams, including Stanford, LSU, where he was, and Rice as well in college. I forgot about Rice there. And a defensive coordinator for the Giants, Ravens, Broncos, Cowboys, just to name a few of them. He's also the head coach of the San Francisco 49ers. It's Mike Nolan. Mike, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks, guys. It's a pleasure. I look forward to being on with you.
Yeah, it should be a fun one tonight. When you're going to debate coaches, you got to bring in a coach. So tonight's debate is the greatest college coach of the last 40 years after Nick Saban, because, there's not much point if you put Nick Saban in it.
There we go. Thanks. I appreciate you saying that. I was going to say, where's Nick's name in this deal? I think they're going to rename some trophies after Nick.
Yeah, absolutely. And as always, afterwards, we'll have our Q&A for Coach tonight. So we're going to jump right into this, and let's start it out with Steve Spurrier.
Yeah, in terms of head coaching, the old ball coach coached from 87 to 89 with Duke. Where I think of him is 90 to 2001, where he was with the Florida Gators, and then he went on to the Gamecocks from 05 to 15. If you count his 11-10 college bowl record, his overall career was 228, 89, and 2. Won the national championship in 96, played for another in 95. 6 SEC championships, 91, 93, 94, 95, 96, and 2000. SEC Coach of the Year 5 times. He's actually the first Heisman Trophy winner to coach a Heisman Trophy winner. If you guys can call that out, that could be a good quiz question. But it's Danny Werfel. Won at least 9 games in each of his 12 seasons. One of only 3 coaches in major college history to do so. Averaged more than 10 wins per season. Ranked in the top 15 in each of his 12 seasons, including 9 top 10 finishes, 5 final top 5 rankings, an average end-of-season ranking of 6.8. Appeared in a bowl game in each of his last 11 seasons, every season in which the Gators were eligible. One of only 5 schools to do so during the same time period. Only coach in major college history to win as many as 120 games in his first 12 seasons at one school. Overall record of 122, 27, and 1 with a win percentage of about 82%. One of only 2 coaches in major college history to win 10 or more games in 6 consecutive seasons from 93 to 98. And in 2005, I don't know if people remember, like when he kind of went over to South Carolina, I think there was rumblings that maybe his best years were behind him, but he was still coaching strong. When he took over the Gamecocks, they had some key wins, very low expectations for the football team, but they beat Tennessee and Florida. They had never beat Tennessee, and the last time they had beaten Florida was in 1939. That was 1939. And in 2006, Spurrier became the first head coach in Gamecock football history to take a team to a bowl game in each of his first 2 seasons. He won his 100th SEC game on October 11th, 2008, coaching the Gamecocks to a 24-17 victory over Kentucky. And in his 10 seasons as Gamecocks head coach, Spurrier has beaten each of South Carolina's traditional SEC Eastern Division rivals at least 5 times. And by the time 2013 came around, he retired in 15. Gamecocks had 3 11-2 seasons in a row. And that's the old ball coach. I think he's a clear winner here.
So, Coach, you're a defensive specialist. Spurrier invented the fun and gun. I mean, why do you think it didn't work in the NFL, but it worked so well in college? Was it a personnel issue, or what are your thoughts on that?
I would have to say it was more of a personnel issue than anything else, because it is about players. And in college, as a college coach, a lot of times you are in charge of picking your players. So no one really is kind of dissecting what you're trying to accomplish in that regard. And so I think that's part of it. Like I said, in professional football, you usually have somebody else. You have a general manager, a personnel director, and people that are kind of doing that. Now, some coaches have a little more say than others, but But Steve was extremely successful, as you mentioned. I mean, my goodness, the list goes on and on for what he did at different programs, not just at one program, and with different quarterbacks, different players. That says an awful lot about Steve. I'm really glad that you added his name into the mix here because, like I said, when you do it with as many teams as he did it with, and where you have to start over again, it's not easy. It's one thing when you stay at one school for a long time and you go through a lot of players in college, but you're in charge of who you're selecting and you can you see it molding and it going where you want it to go. When you start a new program, that's entirely different. You're starting from ground zero, and he did that, on a number of occasions and did an outstanding job. So, Steve's well-deserved to be in this conversation.
A lot of times great players don't make great coaches, but Steve Spurrier certainly did. How hard is it to coach a player when he's not living up to the standards that you set?
Well, let's say this about Steve first. I mean, he did win the Heisman Trophy, so he was a great college player, without a doubt. Obviously, if you win the Heisman, but in the NFL, and I go back to as a matter of fact, Steve played for my father at San Francisco 49ers, so I have semi-history as a kid watching him play for them. And as an NFL quarterback, he was more along the lines of a backup and not a star. Although he did have one season where I think he took them 11-5 and they went to playoffs. I don't know if it was 71 or 2, but one of those 2 years, Steve was the man that drove them into the playoffs, and did a great job there. But you say it right. Most of the time, a good coach. I would say this: a lot of good coaches were not the greatest of players for a simple reason, and that is because you have to learn so much more to do more with less if you're a less talented player. And then therefore you learn how to teach, because when you're going to coach someone, not everyone is going to be at the highest level skill wise. And so if you have the ability to teach someone how to do something as you did yourself, because you weren't the greatest player, again, you become a better teacher. You'll find that whether it's dancing, music, the arts, it could be a lot of things. In sports in particular, it's almost always the case. And like I said, it's a lot of times it's because as a lesser athlete, you have to learn you got to learn the tricks of the trade more than a guy things just come naturally. And a lot of times a very talented player sometimes don't make the best of coaches. And I'm talking about football coaches, not necessarily maybe the rah-rah guy or the motivator, but football coaches, because for that exact same reason, things came so easy to them, it's hard for them to explain to someone how to do it. If you're the fastest guy on the field, how do you tell some guy that's not, you got to be the fastest guy on the field? I mean, that's not good coaching. That's not, you're not going to be the fastest guy just because you told me, hey, coach, I'm ready to do it now because you told me. You've got to kind of show people how to do things. So as a lesser player or a lesser athlete, a lot of times that's the reason they make better coaches.
Steve is also a starter down here with our Buccaneers, so can't forget
that.
Let's move on to Joe Pa.
All right, Joe Paterno, 1966 to 2011. So a huge span of time there. He was in the Happy Valley. 409 victories, which is the most, in FBS history. 2 national titles, 1982 and 86. You could make a case for a third one in 1994. They did go undefeated, but they gave it to Nebraska. 3 Big Ten championships, which may not seem like a lot, but keep in mind that Penn State was independent until 1990, and then they joined that conference. When Joe Pa took over the team in 1966, they had 0 official national titles. They were not really a powerhouse. Paterno built that program from the ground up on the fundamentals. He was a good recruiter. He developed a great system there, which over the years it was producing great running backs and great linebackers, like power smash mouth type football. It's nothing flashy, but it worked. Over his career, he had 5 undefeated seasons. 35 of his 46 seasons, he had 8 or more wins. He produced 30 consensus All-Americans. He won 17 Coach of the Year awards from various factions. He had a 7.49 win percentage, which is 34th all time. 37 bowl appearances, that's more than anybody. 24 bowl wins, that's more than anybody. And he had the 18th best bowl winning percentage. 25 assistants that worked under him. eventually went to either the NCAA or the NFL as head coaches, including guys like Jim Caldwell and the current Carolina Panthers coach, Matt Rule. Now, we all know about the scandal. Got to talk about it. We all know about it near the end of his career. Did he fully know what was going on? Did he do everything he could to stop it? I mean, nobody really knows for sure. But that said, give him the benefit of the doubt, and you really have a tough time finding a more accomplished coach in this time frame that we're talking about.
He reported it to his superiors. We can kind of leave it at that for this show's purpose. But so, Coach, let me ask you, Joe Paul, I mean, I'm not sure how familiar you are with that 1994 season, the undefeated. The championship ended up going to Nebraska. We actually had a whole debate about that. Check it out in the archives, everybody, with Ken Dilger. But he had, in 94, in my opinion, one of the best college football teams I've ever seen. But, I mean, what are your thoughts on Paterno? He did turn that organization into a powerhouse. It's still a powerhouse today. Brian, brought up like a little bit about the scandal, but I think he transcends that at this point.
Yeah, when you talk about football as it is, it's the ultimate team sport. And when you talk about the different coaches, there's a lot of criteria that comes into what makes a guy a great coach. Was he a great football mind? Was he a great motivator? Was he a great game decision maker? Was he a great recruiter? What was it? That, like I said, when you're trying to decide on who it is, and you could fall back on just all the wins somebody has, but sometimes a lot of wins also is because they were on the face of this earth a long time and coached as a head coach a long time. So there's, it's kind of interesting how you have to weigh all those things. And I'm sure we will do at the end when we decide who's the winner of this. But Joe Paul, again, was around a long time, so he should have had a lot of wins. But I really like Joe Paul. I thought he was an outstanding football coach. And the reason I'll say that is because I think he was a good motivator, but he was a very good football mind as well. Some of the guys talking about were more in the CEO category, possibly, maybe not. But in Joe Paul's case, I thought that he was number one, I think he went to Brown University, so he's a very intelligent individual. But although he was at one school all those years, he really was a very bright football coach with a lot of good football in his head. I thought he did a great job over the years with converting running backs to linebackers. They were the linebacker U for a long time. A lot of those guys were ex-running backs, which me, having coached defense for a long time, I think he's exactly hits the mark, because a linebacker is much like a running back. He's got to be able to hit the hole. So that was something that he did transition. He recruited a lot of quarterbacks over the years, made them defensive players, made them safeties. Because of their eyes or ability to see the field. So Joe Paul, to me, as a football coach, not just all the accolades, all the things he won, because obviously that gets him in this conversation, but he was also a great football coach and a great mind. And as we all know, you've already mentioned it, the blemish of the scandal, I don't think we can really, we're talking about who was the best football coach. So I think you have to set that aside. Otherwise, we shouldn't be talking about him at all if that knocks him out. But he was, not only, I think he covered a lot of bases as a head football coach. Like I said, I think he was a people person. He understood football extremely well, let his coaches coach. He's one of my favorite all time.
Unless your school is named Notre Dame, if you're not in a conference, it hurts you. For years, Brian mentioned Penn State wasn't in a conference. Do you know why that is? I mean, you coached in college. What's the reasoning behind that?
Boy, I don't. I couldn't tell you. Well, the reason they weren't in conference was probably for money issues. When you're Penn State, they got to a point where he said, look, if we just make our own schedule, we can get this thing right as an independent, so to speak. Whereas if you're in a division, that division kind of tells you where you have to go and who you have to play and when you have to play. When you're Penn State, even the few games you're going to pick up, they're going to kind of be warm-up games. You get to decide on those. You don't have somebody telling you where you have to go. Not that that's that way now, but I'm just saying you get to call your own shots a little bit more and trying to get into that big game at the end of the season.
Well, let's move on to Bobby Bowden.
Dadgum. Dadgum.
Dadgum is right. Dadgum, good coach.
So Bobby Bowden, he was 73 and 32 even before he got to Florida State. So he was a pretty good coach. He had 2 losing seasons in 40 years. He had one at West Virginia and one his first year at Florida State. He took over a program at Florida State that had won 4-29 in their previous 3 seasons. He went 5-6 his first season, and then he took off from there. For the next 33 seasons, he didn't have one season under 500. He had a 74% winning percentage, and a lot of that time they were in like Penn State. They were independent, so they were playing some of the best teams in the country. And Bobby Bowden had the mentality of anytime, anywhere, because he was recruiting some of the best players in the country. He has 4 Hall of Famers. He had 33 first rounders. So he was recruiting. He was playing anybody, anywhere. And he was also playing Miami and Florida every year, who were perennial top 10 teams. From 87 to 2020, they finished in the top 5 in the AP poll every year. 80. That's 13 years they finished in the top 5. That's 13 years. They went 13-0-1 from 87 to 2001. 13-0-1 in bowl games. Seven of those games were major bowl games. From 82 to 95, was the bowl games. In 1999, they were the first team to start as the preseason number 1 and finish as the postseason number 1. So they went the entire season as the top ranked team. They didn't lose a game, and they dominated that entire season. He's a 1997 ACC Coach of the Year, 96 Home Depot Coach of the Year, 93 ACC Coach of the Year, 91 Walter Camp Coach of the Year. He had 24 consistent All-Americans, which is more than Joe Pa in less time. 32 first rounders. He had 4 Hall of Famers, 2 Heisman Trophies, 2 Heisman Trophy winners. 177 players were drafted under Bobby Bowden. A minute. Bobby Bowden in bowl games was 22-10-1. Joe Paterno was 24-12-1. So he had a better win percentage in bowl games. And
so some just some great sayings from Coach Bowden. The player is more than a jersey. Be yourself, not someone else. And then I love this one. And Coach, this is the one I really want to get your thought on. Bobby Bowden's coaching theory was scared to death to lose. And he wasn't joking with that. So what are your thoughts on that and Bobby Bowden?
Bobby Bowden, look, I think he was a great motivator of his team. He was a people person all the way, and football is a people business. They referred to him as it already started when they talked about dadgum good guy. He was a dadgum good guy, that's for sure, and everyone had great respect for him. He let his coaches coach. He was more of a CEO type as far as the football goes. I think he was less of a football coach. Not that he was bad. He was a good football coach, but I'm just saying he was more of a motivator, more of a recruiter, getting the right people. Those 14, I think it was 14, I think he may have said 13, but 14 consecutive seasons of number 5 or better. As a matter of fact, it was 13 at 4 or better and 14 at 5 or better. That 14th year, they were ranked 5th. But anyhow, Bobby Bowden, like I said, I think the difference between him and Joe and even Steve was that he was probably a little bit more of the CEO type, let his coaches coach, let them do the work, but had an awful lot to say with everything they did. Don't get me wrong. And a tremendous person. Guys played extremely hard for him, and you can't underscore that as a coach. You can have lesser talented, but if they can play above that, that talent level, and he had talented teams, they all played, over their head for him. I think they had great love for their coach, and he was a great coach for those reasons. And I don't think that is overshadowed by somebody that knows football. I mean, it's whatever it takes to get your team. When you're a head coach, it's whatever it takes to get your team to play and win and play hard. And he was a great one.
Brian, let me come to you real quick on Bowden. So Florida now has 3 huge colleges of college football, but it kind of started with Bowden. Do we have Miami Rising and Florida Gators as well without Bowden?
I mean, it definitely put those rivalries on the map for sure. I mean, without them rising up, and then even recently, USF is come a little bit into the picture, and Central Florida's come a little bit into the picture whenever they had that undefeated season. So yeah, I mean, I think the strength of Bowden certainly helped for football in the state of Florida. Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's move on to our final coach tonight. That's Urban Meyer. So I'm just going to say, let's forget about his 1-year tenure in the NFL. Let's just look past that. Let's move on. All right.
I'm sure Jacksonville would like to forget.
Yeah. So head coach at Bowling Green from 01 to 02, Utah 03 to 04, Florida 05 to 10, and Ohio State 2012 to 2018. So I'm not going to throw out like his win record and all his bowls like you guys are doing. I'm just going to try and prove that he's better than your coaches, and I'm going to start with this. So he wins a championship, a national championship, every 5.3 years. Spurrier every 26 years, Paterno every 23 years, and Bowden every 20 years. So he's got you there. Now, we go to the bowl winning percentage here, and Urban Meyer is at 800 win percentage in his bowl games. We got Bowden at 656, Paterno at 648, and Spurrier at 523. So superior in the bowl games. Then we go over to that regular season winning percentage. Urban Meyer is third all time at 854. There's not another that's even in the top 25 that we talked about tonight, believe it or not. So that is just absolutely incredible. He's got all the trophies that all the other coaches have tonight. By the time this show comes out, I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more stuff about what happened in Jacksonville this past year, but we're only talking about college. So I think he's better as far as his short time period. He was on a short time period compared to these other guys, but he's got the championships, and let's face it, championships is what it's all about. So, Coach, with Urban Meyer, there was some little issue about how he left the Florida Gators. There was some heart issues or something, and then he turns around and he's coaching at Ohio State the next year. So I wasn't a real big fan of how that worked out. But what are your thoughts on him as a coach? Medical issues.
Just talk football and nothing else.
Yeah, and do you think after what's happened this past year in the NFL, do you think he's going to get another shot in the college?
Well, I'll take that one on first, just because you just asked. But I do think if he wants to, he'll coach again in college. I mean, sure. Look, when he left Florida, there was some what's going on, and he got the Ohio State job. And so he leaves Ohio State, and then sooner or later he gets, the Jacksonville and all. So so yes, I do, because when people are looking for a good coach, and especially if they're coming off a bad season, Jacksonville, a good example, they're just struggling to try and start to win again. I mean, people will do anything. They want to win, and so they'll take on guys that have some blemishes, and he certainly has some blemishes. I mean, that Florida team that he had, although they were good, he had some shady characters. Now, a couple of them went up to New England, and it was a little bit dicey. But again, if we stay with football, it's hard to argue what Urban has done in a short time. He's also the guys we've talked about from a position coaching standpoint, and is working his ways up the ranks. He probably had more football, from an experience as an assistant coach, things like that. He's got more experience in that regard than most of the other guys. Not to say he's better, but I do think he's a very good football coach. I always say this about football: two things. It's the ultimate team sport, which it is, and it is a people business. So I think what's always going to happen if you have a panel of people, whether it's us or any panel, and they're including Urban Meyer, because the people thing is so entrenched in sports and athletics, they're going to shy. They're just going to back off a little bit from Urban for that reason, just because he's inconsistent in a lot of things as far as people skills go. And as you already said, it didn't help him any going to Jacksonville, and a lot of that stuff. I have several people I know at Jacksonville, and I don't think I don't think he shed a good light on too many people down there. But nonetheless, as football goes, Look, he's accomplished a lot at different places. He had to start over at a number of places and get it going right away. He didn't go to schools that aren't able to compete from a recruiting standpoint. He went to schools that were pretty good after Utah. Utah, he did a great job there. I think he went from Bowling Green, did a great job. Went to Utah, did a great job. Got the Florida job, then went to Ohio State. Look, he's as a coach, throw everything else out. I think he deserves to be in the discussion without question.
Excellent. Well, let's move into our vote tonight. Cannot vote for your own guys. Paul?
I can't vote for mine, so I'll go Joe Paterno just because my late father was such a huge fan of him. Do a little nostalgia. I'll go for Joe Pa.
Okay. Brian?
When I look at these guys, I really, like Coach said, the off the field sort of stuff aside, what Urban Meyer was able to do, to come in and get a championship, multiple schools the way that he did, and then he really, what he did at Utah was a heck of a achievement as well. Kind of put that program on the map. So I'm going to go with Urban.
I give us just the slightest of edge of Bowden over Paterno, and I think it's because he's got the extra ring there. So I'm going to take Bowden. Rollo?
I grew up in PA, so Penn State, Shane Conlon, Kajana Carter, like those are the names I grew up with. I came around. So Joe Pa is my vote.
Okay. Coach?
Well, we're talking football and nothing else. I still think longevity. I would have to go Joe Pa.
All right.
Great group of four guys now. Great group of four guys.
3 votes for Joe Paterno. Paterno gets the win. I'm sure Kevin was wishing he was here. He's the Penn State grad, but he would have been happy with that one. So, Brian, you got the win. Congratulations. You get first question tonight.
All right. Well, yeah, this first question is going to pertain to what's behind me here. 1968, your father, Dick Nolan, became the head coach of the San Francisco 49ers. Did pretty well. He kept running into the Cowboys in the playoffs. But then 37 years later, 2005, you were named head coach of the 49ers. Can you express to us, what that moment felt like? Because, that had to be just so cool.
You know what? It really was cool. There was only 2 openings that year. I was the defensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens, and I would interview for the Cleveland job and the 49er job. And that's rare that there's so few jobs, opening. But I was fortunate to have an opportunity to go to San Francisco. It was before any really decision was made at Cleveland or at San Francisco. But anyway, I had that opportunity to go there, and I just thought that it was so, like you said. It's cool is a good word. It was neat. It hit home for me. I had lived there from 68. My father went out there from 68 to 75. I lived there all those years. I'd actually coached at Stanford a couple of years when I got out of college. So I was extremely familiar with the area and just the history that went with it. Everything about the job to me was exciting. Even the challenge that we had. It was a very poor football team with very little talent when I went there. I thought in the 3.5 years that we really did build up a good nucleus of players. But as all of us coaches witness, and I've had seen the good and the bad side of this is also, and that is, when we left it was a lot better than when we took it over, and it was really, getting ready to go to those Super Bowls like it did. But somebody's got to put that together. And I've been in situations on the other side of that coin too, when I walk into a great situation. But that one there was one where we had to build it, but it was still an exciting time to be able to do that. I've got family out there, so everything about the job was exciting, but also every bit a challenge to try and rectify. Because like I said, they had been down for a number of years, and I think they're coming off only a 2-win season at that time as well when I took it over. So, but nonetheless, like I said, no regrets, because it was a great experience.
So, pandemic football, how, as a coaching staff, did you guys adjust, and how did the players adjust to it?
Well, it was 2020. I'd gone to the Dallas Cowboys as defensive coordinator with Mike McCarthy. The pandemic was a real strain early on because no one really knew what we were, what we were going to do, what was, were we going to have a season to begin with? Were we not? As it turned out, we didn't have a preseason. We just practiced all the way up until the first game and then played our opener. We played in the Rams. But anyhow, it took a look when it was a new staff. I thought the thing that was most difficult was it was a brand new staff with no preseason, and to get your systems in place, that's really hard. It took us a good 4 to 6 weeks to get on track, which is what a preseason would be, 4 games at that time, not 3 now. And that would have helped us tremendously, but we weren't given that. And either were the other few teams that dealt with the same problem, meaning the other new staffs. But for us, it seemed to hit us much harder, in particular on the defensive side, where we had a lot of free agents that came in to start because we didn't have we really didn't have a good nucleus of players at the time. And as a matter of fact, it turned out our best players were our draft choice guys. So anyhow, I think the real strain was just the fact, like I said, there was no time to put any systems in. And so that first month or so, that's what you're basically doing during the season. And it didn't fare well for us. I think we might've come out of it with 1 win, maybe 2. I know we beat Atlanta, but we had some not so good defensive games. It took us a while to get back. But after that, again, we played some really good football in the middle of the season and down the stretch. And that's how it affected us the most. Just was, again, our difference was new staff, new systems, and really very little time to put anything in.
Paul, then Rollo.
Would you be willing to share, since you've done both, but and even some of the coaches we're talking about tonight have gone from college to the NFL and had really short stints. And I know that there's success stories, but there's a lot of I don't want to say failure stories, but it just didn't work out. And then they either go back to college or kind of go away. I know there's recruiting in college and there's, a lot of pay in the NFL, but you're the authority. Why is that transition so challenging? How would you sum that up?
I think it's a great question. And there's 2 things that come to mind right away. And the first one is you don't have control in college. As a head coach, you have control of who you're recruiting, your players. You have control of all of them. And it's a much younger athlete, much younger person, someone that you can mold a lot. They're not necessarily kind of set in their ways as an NFL player would be. So the number one thing I think would be that would have to do with you don't have the power of picking the players that you do. And the other thing is a lot of those guys that go in come from really big schools. You know what I mean? And Nick went years ago, but the guys that are going from college to NFL are going from big programs, winning programs. And so when they get into the NFL, they're usually taking over a team that needs some development, needs some, they need some things. They need to get some players on board because, that's really what it's all about. I mean, you look at all the coaches we just talked about and look at any Hall of Fame coach, anybody, they all had players and every single one of them had quarterbacks. If they don't, then they don't get that notoriety. So it's all about getting players. And I think that when a guy goes from college to pro, he finds out he doesn't have the control that he had in college to get the guys that he wants to get because it's not run that way. There's every now and then a coach will have that power, but does he have the time to turn that roster around? And again, it's not about recruiting. It's a draft. Recruiting, if you're the best recruiter, you can beat people on 5 number 1 draft picks. Well, the NFL, you don't have 5 number 1 picks. You got 1, and if you're lucky, you might land 2. But you know what I'm saying? You got a draft that you have to build off of, which already says it's not going to happen overnight like it might have happened in college, where you could be the best recruiter and get the best players. It doesn't run that way. The NFL is built on parity. So I think those are the things I think really make it stressful for it. I don't think there's any doubt that college coaches from a football mind can handle NFL, no problem. I mean, no problem whatsoever. I mean, as a matter of fact, the NFL now incorporates all kinds of college things. It's going back 15 years ago when they adopted the all the triple option and all that part of the game, just to upgrade the quarterback position. So again, I think it all is related to players and the ability to get them or not get them.
I love that answer. That is such a perfect answer, and I don't think it gets enough respect from people who aren't thinking about it, because if you started a job in an industry and the job you went to needed a ton of work but you couldn't pick who you were working with, and were always in the media, and you didn't know if you were going to get a year or 2 years. Nobody ever puts themselves in the position of that, and I think your answer was perfect there.
Well, thanks.
Brian, Paul, and Rollo.
Well, if I understand correctly, Dan Reeves helped you get your start in the NFL by hiring you on in Denver, and then also you followed him over to the New York Giants. We were all saddened to hear of his passing here recently. So what can you tell us? What was it like working for Dan Reeves, and what kind of man was he?
I'll give you a quick history. When I was a kid, Dan Reeves played for the Dallas Cowboys. My father was Dallas Cowboy coach. My first encounter with Dan Reeves was I was in the locker room. It was about probably 1966 and all. I was about 7 years old, and I was just happened to be led into the locker room because my father was a coach. I was just standing around, and Dan Reeves was a player, and he was up on this table, and they were sticking this big needle in his hip. He got a hip pointer, and I remember watching this big, long needle going to this guy's hip, and my eyes got about that big, and I'm thinking, oh, my God. Well, that stuck with me as one of my earliest childhood memories I've ever had. Well, anyhow, so time goes on, and my father always, when Dan Reeves as a player went between running back and defensive back and forth, and when they weren't using him on offense, my dad would say, hey, let's put him on defense. He'd tell Tom Landry was the coach at the time. He'd say, hey, let me use him over on defense as defensive back for a little bit. So my father had a great relationship with him. Time goes on. I go into college. I go to University of Oregon. I play years there, and I want to get a tryout in the NFL. My father calls Dan and asks him if I can, hey, we give my son a shot as a tryout. My father at that time was at the Houston Oilers, and I didn't obviously want to go where my father was. If I could help it, I'd go someplace else. So in 1981, I got a tryout with the 49ers, or when I say 49ers, with the Denver Broncos in Dan Reeves' first year. He brought me in. I tried out. I got cut I guess I made training camp about 4 weeks. It was about 6 weeks long, maybe 4.5, 5 weeks. I can't remember. But nonetheless, at the end, he asked me what I wanted to do. And I said, I think I'm going to go into – this was as he cut me. He cut me. He said, hey, I'm sending you on your way, but what's your plans? I said, well, I'm going to go back and get into coaching. And he made a joke. He said, well, you're not as smart as I thought you were. He said, getting into coaching. He says, didn't you learn from your father? Didn't you learn from whatever? Anyhow, he said, look, stay in touch, and I'll keep an eye on you as things go. And so the next 6 years I was in college coaching. I gave him, it was at LSU. We had just won the SEC. We had lost to Nebraska in a bowl game in the Sugar Bowl. And our coach at the time was Bill Arnsparger. He was leaving. And I was still able to stay with Mike Archer if you wanted me to. But I said, hey, look, Mike, I would like to look to see if I can move on. I called Dan Reeves to say, hey, look, if I can use you on my resume, I'd appreciate it. He said, I got a game tomorrow. And I had completely lost track of time. He was getting ready for the championship game against the Cleveland Browns when they had the 99-yard drive. And so this is the night before it. And he says, hey, look, I got a game tomorrow. He says, but give me a call next in a week or two. And we'll, if we win the game, we're going to play in the Super Bowl. If not, blah, blah, blah. Well, anyhow, they won the game against Cleveland Browns. They played in the Super Bowl, played the Cowboys, lost. But right after that game, I just called him, touch base, and said, look, you told me to give you a shout. He says, I got a special teams job. It's going to be open. You interested? I said, yes. I went to work for him there at the Denver Broncos in '86 as a special teams coach. 2 years later, I became his linebacker coach. 4 years later, I became his defensive coordinator for the New York Giants. We were there 4 years together. I was with Dan 10 years in all. And then he was let go at the Giants. And before he had gotten the Falcon job, I had taken the coordinator's job at the Washington Redskins with Norv Turner. So we parted at that time, although I say parted as working for him, we did, but I had always kept in contact with that. Dan was big brother, the father figure to me always, to the day he died. We remained close all through those years. We coached together as well as when I left. I went down to his funeral here a few months ago when he died on January 1st. Very close with the family. Pam, his wife, always remained close with Dan. Probably my biggest regret in coaching would be the fact that I ever left him, to be honest with you. I shouldn't say regret. If there was something that I would wonder if I'd done it over again and done it that way, if it had been different, although I've had a lot of ups and downs, but a great career. I mean, it's 34 years in the NFL, and a lot of it due to Dan Reeves. But nonetheless, he was such a great man in my eyes that, when you look back on things, sometimes you think, why'd I ever leave that guy? I mean, he was so good. But again, I had my own experiences I had to go search out. So that's my long explanation. You're thinking, my God, I should never ask that question.
No, it's great. I'm a big
Sure.
fan of Reese fan, and honestly, I don't understand why he's not in the Hall of Fame. I mean, he took two different teams to the Super Bowl, four total Super Bowls. I mean, I don't see why he's not.
I'll tell you why. It's because the Hall of Fame is political. And when it comes to coaches and things like that, Dan was never a guy to promote himself. He was in 9 Super Bowls. No one's had more Super Bowls than Dan Reeves. Well, I should say that Tom Brady, before it's over, probably will. But anyhow, he went to 9 Super Bowls as a player, coach. And like you said, he took 2 teams to Super Bowls himself. And just, he was he was a great man. He really was. He was, when it comes to people, Dan Reeves was the best, by far. I never worked for a man as good a man or as good a coach, and I worked for a lot of good ones, but he was exceptional.
Was that me, Mike? I forget now what happened. Okay, so
Yeah.
and we covered your no, I'm just kidding. Your father was a coach. We talked about that. You've been a coach for many teams, many years. Is there a piece of advice that you have received that stuck with you throughout these years that you've kind of shared with others that impacted you? And then the small second part of that is, and you might have just covered it, is Denver where you felt you had the most impact, or where did you feel like you had the most impact at?
Well, first off, I had mentioned earlier, and it stuck with me. I say it often as far as things that I would pass along when it comes to coaches or even outsiders looking at it. But football, when you watch the game, is the ultimate team sport. And I think whether you're coaching it, you have to recognize that all the parts, especially if you're a head coach, you have to recognize that all the parts together are going to make you successful or make your team successful. On the field, off the field, every position can either make a play a touchdown or a complete failure. The other thing is that football is a people business. I mean, it's about coaching. It's about teaching. You know, there's 22 players on the field at one time that have all been coached or taught by somebody to do their job. We know what are they motivated to do that job, or are they just doing it? A lot of times a coach has a lot to do with that. So, like I said, the ultimate team sport and people business all the way. The last question you asked was what was
I got sort of a sense that Denver is where you felt you had the most impact, but I wanted to see if you agreed with that, or if there was another place.
You know, I think in fairness to the positions that you have, when I was head coach, I think you have the most impact on your football team. Good, bad, and indifferent. I think that's just by position alone you do. But I would say that the most fun I ever had with impact was the 3 years I was the defensive coordinator at the Baltimore Ravens back in 2002, 3, and 4. I mean, Ed was the player of the year in 2004. Ray was the player of the year in 2003. 2002 was a transition year for us from going, because we had to cut loose a lot of the guys after the Super Bowl, and nonetheless. But anyhow, that was a really exciting time. I thought I had a great impact on it because we'd started clean slate, with the exception of Lewis, and so. But we drafted Ed Reed. But anyhow, that would probably have been it. It was exciting too. I mean, they were such good players. We'd throw out calls sometimes that I'd be going, "Oh my God, I wish I needed to have that one back." And sure enough, it'd be a great play for us. I'm thinking, thank God those guys made it work. So
Awesome.
Brother.
You were able to coach with John Elway, Ray Lewis, both who are historically intense leaders. Which one of those two, to you, I know you were a young guy with John Elway, which one of those two were more intense in their approach to the game, their film review, all that stuff?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was very close to Ray. I was on the special teams and defensive side of the ball when I was with Elway, and Elway and I actually played against each other. He was at Stanford and I was at Oregon. We played against each other. I'm 2 years older than Elway, but I've always had great respect for John. He was a fierce competitor. I think that's a great comparison that you bring up, because John, I think, although as talented as he was extremely talented, but to go along with that, he was extremely competitive. And you don't, most all great quarterbacks are competitive, but to the level John was, and to have the talent he had is why he was a great player. But I must say that the most inspirational, team, talented leader, intense player was Ray Lewis, without question. And I was fortunate. Look, I've coached a lot of great ones: Michael Strahan, Lawrence Taylor, Deion Sanders. I mean, a lot of great. I'm fortunate to have coached a lot of guys, probably about a dozen Hall of Fame guys. And Ray, I think right below him would be Lawrence Taylor, but Ray is without question in my mind is an exceptional leader, exceptional, just the passion that he exuded and to his teammates, the leadership that he had was more than I could say. I don't think anyone will match this. It really was incredible to be around him and to watch him work, watch him inspire the guys around him. And he did it all on his own. He was a great football player, great leader.
So we'll get you out of here with this tonight. When you go to the New York Giants, you're replacing some guy named Bill Belichick as the defensive coordinator. And of course, Reese takes over for Bill Parcells. You guys inherited what, in my opinion, was an aging team. The defense was certainly on the older side, and Phil Simms was I think he played one more year with you guys before he retired.
Yes, he did.
How hard was that to they didn't give you time to rebuild at all, really, in my opinion. Like, what was that transition like, having to take over for two legends, basically?
Now I got to ask. Now, how old were you in '93? Now you had to be a little guy.
No, I was 93. I would have been middle school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, were you New York? Were you a New York guy?
Steelers.
Steelers. All right. Well,
But
we went there.
Phil Simms was my favorite player growing up. So
Phil was a great player and a great man, a great leader as well. He was. Although Phil had real good talent, he was a great leader. But anyhow, look, we went in there in '93. There was the free agency had just started because Reggie White was on the block and blah, blah, blah. So, but it wasn't like it is today where they got this mass, exit all the time. We stuck with a lot of older guys. I tell you what made it work. There was a bunch of guys on that team that were there with Parcells about 2 and 3 years prior that had been to the Super Bowl. And they may have been aging, whether it was Lawrence Taylor, a number of defensive players were there at that time. And all they really wanted to do was to play cover two gap, cover two. And so when we went in there, that's all we did. And the prior 2 years when they really fell off the thing was they were trying to be more exotic and do some other things to make up for what they thought was some talent loss. But we had such tough, strong-minded, strong-willed guys that's what made it work. We just went to very basic in what we did scheme-wise. They played their hearts out. There was a lot of guys that retired after that season, Lawrence Taylor being one of them. And that's why it worked for us on the defensive side of the ball. As a team, it worked because Dan Reeves' leadership, Phil Simms on offense, and a number of offensive guys would probably fall in the same bracket I'm talking about. There was a bunch of guys on that team that knew how to win, and they just wanted to go back to basics and just out-tough everybody like they did with Parcells. And that's really what worked. I mean, we gave up the fewest points in New York Giants history. It still stands to this day. We gave up 12 points a game for 16 weeks, played the very final game against the Cowboys and lost 16-13, and they had a loaded football team, and then lost to the Niners a couple weeks later out in San Francisco on a short week. But, again, the success of that team belongs to Dan, the leaders on that football team, and just the fact that we went back to basics with those guys because that's all they wanted to do. But man, that was probably the most mature bunch of guys I've ever been around in my life on a football field. I mean, there was a bunch of guys that just had been to the battles and were just like, I'm going one more time and then I'm out. And that's what they did. And they played their hearts out. That's a great memory.
Well, thank you so much, Coach Mike Nolan, for joining us. Awesome. We appreciate that.
Thank you, guys. Sorry my answers got a little long-winded.
No, totally fine.
That's what coaches do, man.
Football minds, we accept it. Football minds, we accept it.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, thank you very much. It was certainly a pleasure.
Everybody make sure you hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Have a great night.